over the last few months, we've been covering in detail the economic crisis in neighbouring Sri Lanka. But that crisis has now spread like a sort of a contagion to other nations in India's neighbourhood. In fact, suddenly exploded into a zone besieged with economic challenges. In Pakistan, for instance, you would have read the story of a few days ago where a senior minister asked citizens to drink less tea so that they don't have to import more of the commodity. In the wake of that post, which said that the nation consumed tea worth 83 billion rupees in the fiscal year. Meanwhile, markets in Karachi have been ordered to shut ops by 9 p.m. every day to save electricity. The inflation in Pakistan is at a 2.5-year high and has remained in double digits for the last 7 months. In Sri Lanka, the unprecedented economic crisis continues. Inflation is as high as 34% year-on-year in April, and in a bid to combat skyrocketing prices, the government has announced 2-week shutdown of government offices. School exams have been cancelled due to paper shortage, and the country will now try out a 4-day work week only to save on fuel, the cost of people getting to work and back. In Nepal, the government has appealed up to 100,000 Nepali nationals living abroad to deposit $10,000 each in Nepali banks to shore up their forex. So what really is happening in these nations? What is the common thread over here, and what are the implications for India? To speak more on this, I'm joined now by Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, Sushant Sareen, Strategic Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at ORF, and Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate South Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today. Ambassador Shankar, let me begin with your view. Now, a lot of people are commenting that one common thread, perhaps in all of the crisis that is impacting these nations, is the Chinese presence and the kind of impact China has had on these countries, the amount of money they've loaned to them, and then now the tap has sort of stopped flowing. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think it's one of the factors, certainly, because Chinese loans for the Belt and Road Initiative did not have transparent terms, did not evaluate the capacity of the country to pay back. And very often the loans were at interest rates, which were much higher than the interest rates given by lending agencies such as the ADB or World Bank. So the interest outgo now on the loans that have been taken is a very heavy burden on the balance of payments of these countries. But I would say that another common thread is COVID related, particularly for Sri Lanka and Nepal, because it hit the tourism industry in these two countries, which was one of the major foreign exchange earners for them. The net result being that they are unable to pay for even basic imports in Sri Lanka. Nepal is not in such a bad way as yet. They are acting more by way of precaution that given the crisis in the fall in tourism numbers to Nepal, they could be confronted with something like this in future. In Pakistan, I think apart from the China factor, it's the fact that they have habitually been living beyond their means because the army takes up such a big chunk of the government budget. I mean, even now, when the Pakistani ministers are calling on the Pakistani public to drink less tea, to cut back on tea imports, the army has got an 11% increase in its budgetary outlay. So I think in Pakistan, it's a structural issue which goes beyond this China factor as well, which involves basically, one organ of government, which is the security establishment, getting a share of resources which is not commensurate with the constraints that Pakistan faces on its balance of payments and finances. Now, in the past, Pakistan was bailed out because they were a frontline state of Afghanistan. And multiple times you've seen that their debts have been either there's been a debt write-off
Right.
or the debts have been rescheduled. I don't know, maybe more than 7 times in recent years, but it's been almost habitual. But now that Afghanistan no longer has the presence of Western international forces, Pakistan has not had such a soft touch dealing by international agencies or international debtors.
Okay.
Now, for international debtors or lending agencies, actually, the question is they lend at a lower rate than the interest rate that Sri Lanka or Pakistan has borrowed at from China. So they don't want the money that they give to go to retire Chinese debt and want China to take a haircut on some of the outstanding loans that they have saddled these countries with. In Pakistan, I think the IMF also wants Pakistan to renegotiate some of the power projects and the tariffs which China has imposed under the Belt and Road Initiative. So yes, the China factor is certainly at play, and it's a cautionary tale for other countries beguiled by the glamour of the Belt and Road Initiative. It's also the COVID-related impact because tourism was a major mainstay of Sri Lanka and Nepal, and it's very vulnerable to global crises. And in Pakistan, I would say there's a structural problem going beyond these, which is basically, how does the army adjust to a smaller role in keeping with a
you can't keep paying yourself hikes when the money is running out. Michael Kugelman, one more factor, and that's really impacted the world, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, isn't it? And that's just shot up inflation. The weaker nations economically are now feeling the brunt. Do you think that this is going to be like an economic contagion that could spread? Or are these three very specific, distinct cases?
Impacts of the Russian invasion of Ukraine have been very global. They've impacted countries around the world, including the United States, where gasoline prices have been off the charts. And I think that the upcoming BRICS meeting, which I think will occur this Thursday, one of the main objectives will be for the member countries to discuss ways to minimize the negative impacts that the Ukraine crisis is having on the economies of the BRICS countries. But I think that, to your broader question about a common factor with these three countries that we're discussing, the Russia invasion is one of them, the pandemic is another, China is part of it, the Chinese loans is part of it, but I would also identify a broader topic, and that is simply many years of misgovernance and bad economic policy decisions in these three countries, especially Pakistan and Sri Lanka. And, those many years of bad decisions, which in Sri Lanka have included things like welcoming in all kinds of Chinese loans right when the long-running civil war ended, putting Sri Lanka in a very difficult position right from the start, to more recently when the government decided to make some tax policies that backfired, to trying to bring in organic fertilizers. All these things backfired. And with Pakistan, there's a long history of continuing to emphasize non-competitive textile exports. So at any rate, those many years of bad policies made these countries especially vulnerable to external shocks. And we've had a double whammy of external shocks with the pandemic and the supply chain shocks, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that puts these countries in a difficult spot. But I would echo what Ambassador Shankar said. Nepal is in a different category from Pakistan and Sri Lanka. Yes, Nepal has a trade deficit. It's seen its foreign reserves decline. but not as seriously as we've seen with Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Nepal has enough foreign reserves for about 6 months, as I understand it, whereas Pakistan has enough for 6 weeks, and in Sri Lanka, you're talking about 6 days or just a few days. And you also don't have the political instability and the protests in Nepal that you do in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. That's a key factor to highlight as well.
I think the other key factor vis-a-vis Nepal is that India would perhaps come in and help out more easily and could help out more easily for a nation like Nepal. Sushant, do you think that's one factor that is perhaps keeping Nepal a little more secure right now? And the implications for India if three nations in the neighborhood are seeing the economies tank?
Look, as far as Nepal is concerned, I don't think the scale of their problem is anywhere close to what Sri Lanka and Pakistan are confronting. And each of these cases is different. This is not some kind of a contagion which is spreading. Each case is a sui generis case. The Nepalese have been smart to not go down the path of both Sri Lanka as well as Pakistan of living beyond means. And I think Michael is right. At the root of the crisis in both Sri Lanka as well as Pakistan is fiscal imprudence. And then everything else which has followed from that. And in the case of Pakistan, they have this habit of living off other people's money. They take loans as though it's disposable income, which does not have to be returned. In fact, the first time the Saudis asked for their money back, there were horrified looks on Pakistani faces that how come somebody is asking for his money back from us? So clearly that gravy train has stopped. They have tried to, play too clever by half with everybody, including the IMF, which they have taken for a ride multiple times in the past 20 odd years. And now the IMF is turning the screw on them. And they are saying that, look, either you reform, you undertake the structural reforms, or there is no money coming your way. And frankly, the situation in Pakistan is going to be Sri Lanka on steroids if it does come to a default. But even if they evade default, suspect that the economy is going to be in deep trouble going forward and it's going to remain in a crisis mode for the foreseeable future, which is at least 4 to 5 years, if not longer. Tamanna, you can have a special program on Pakistan to understand the scale of the crisis out there. But as far as India is concerned, I think we are trying to do what we can to help Sri Lanka. I think as far as Nepal is concerned, we will do whatever we can. As far as Pakistan is concerned, I think we should take out a popcorn and watch the show. Frankly speaking, Pakistan has hardly been a friendly country to us. And if the Pakistanis, because of reasons which Ambassador Shankar suggested, but that's, I think, just one part of it. The larger part of it is how they have systematically destroyed the economic potential of Pakistan. Michael talks about textile exports. Look, if you are increasing exports by giving 5 rupees of subsidy to increase 1 rupee of export, okay, maybe the Pakistanis can, they understand that economics. Nobody else who even hasn't studied economics will understand that economics. So, frankly, they have what was coming their way, honestly. So, no sympathies out there.
You say, Sushant, that this is not looking like a contagion and maybe not in the neighborhood, but nations like Egypt, Tunisia are already raising red flags. There are going to be economies who are not going to be able to withstand what's coming. And that points clearly to a larger problem, you would agree?
Look, only partly, because most of these countries, again, which you are mentioning, have been countries which have tried to develop, go on to the developmental mode without undertaking the necessary feasibility studies. When the Lankans, for example, went in for all those fancy white elephant projects, they never studied the feasibility of those projects. Hamban Tota was offered to India. India questioned the feasibility of that project. In a half went to the Chinese. And now, it's a port where no ship comes. They built an airport in which no plane lands. there's a cricket stadium in which no match is played, and there's a highway running from Galle to Colombo in which hardly half a dozen cars move at any one point of time. So clearly, if you're going to build projects, because these are these vanity projects, then you're going to pay the price for it, because those projects are not going to pay for themselves. I suspect in the case of Ethiopia, at least, something similar has happened. Of course, the external shocks have exacerbated the problem. But the basic problem has come from fiscal imprudence, living beyond means, trying to develop at a pace which is unsustainable. And then when the smallest of external shock comes, the economy is tagged.
Living beyond their means, I'm going to just make that question a little wider, and I'm coming to you on this, Michael, because for the longest time, this has been the economic path for developed nations to follow. Focus on infrastructure, push in revenue generation and employment through focus on big infrastructural projects. And that is what Sri Lanka seemed to be doing. Before the crisis hit, a lot of the things they've been doing have been recommendations for a while. So when we look at this crisis, we also need to look at a rethink on what works economically, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. But this gets back to the misgovernance issues that I mentioned before. It's not only about bad policy, but it's about bad governance, and particularly corruption, which has been a major problem in all the countries that we're discussing, including Nepal. And I think that those that study Nepal closely worry that the entrenched corruption in that country will make it all the more difficult to try to come out of this rut, even if currently it's not in as bad of a position as Sri Lanka and Pakistan are in. But one more point to the China factor. I agree that taking on so many Chinese loans that can't be paid back is a factor of why these countries are facing the situation they're facing. But I think it's important to keep a brighter context in mind here. If you look at Pakistan, for example, we know that Pakistan has been a key component of the Belt and Road Initiative, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. But still, today, the biggest source of debt in Pakistan has nothing to do with China and these Chinese loans coming in, but it's public sector companies that are hemorrhaging debt. The Pakistani airline, the Pakistani railway, that is where, public sector debt, that is where the biggest problem lies. And that gets to the broader issue that there's so many different reasons why these countries are experiencing the challenges that they are. That makes it all the more overwhelming for these countries, for these governments to figure out what to do. And I think in a country like Pakistan, you have a leadership crisis as well, where the government doesn't appear to have a plan. It's facing all kinds of pressure from the opposition. Stocks fell because of the perception that the Pakistani government didn't have a plan and didn't know what it was doing. And it also costed a new package from the IMF, because the IMF saw that the government couldn't make a decision about whether to remove a fuel subsidy that the previous government had put in place. So it's just very messy. So there's questions about policy, there's questions about governance, there's questions about leadership, and it's a real perfect storm, particularly in a country like Pakistan, but really all three of the countries we're discussing today.
Considering that the external factors are common to all nations around the world, Michael said a short while ago that gasoline prices in the United States are off the charts, etc. Ambassador Shankar, I'm going to come to you with that question. What are the factors that is keeping India safe against these external issues right now? What do we have inherently going for us?
Well, I would say that we also face pressure right now, not on this scale, but we are facing pressure on the balance of payments front. But there are two things which help us with regard to the balance of payments. One is that India is seen as an economy which is performing well right now compared to other economies in the world. So you've had a great inflow of FII and FDI into India, which of course right now is flowing out, the FII money, because of the increase in interest rates in the US, and that is stepping up the pressure on your balance of payments. The other is your overseas population, which actually sends back remittances anything in the order of 40 to 50 billion dollars. And that's again a major factor which helps to stabilize your balance of payments. Finally, you have a large market and a large domestic industry. So at least 90% of your investment in India was domestically driven. So these domestic capacities also help to act as a cushion in a crisis like this. But it's not as though we are free from facing the pressures generated by the global crises, the twin crises of COVID and the Ukraine war, which have pushed up commodity prices and the impact of have led to scarcities in supply chains, disruptions in supply chains, and which whose impact is being felt all across the world. So I think there is a case for the global community to discuss, debt rescheduling or postponement of debt payments for particularly vulnerable countries in this situation, on a broader basis than waiting for a crisis to occur and, have a collapse and then begin negotiations. I think maybe a broader international initiative perhaps is required.
Just a last word on that, Sushant and Michael. I have very little time, so I request you to keep your responses short. But I think this is an important aspect of the conversation where we should have comments all around. Sushant?
So I think many of the developed countries have, in fact, including the G20, have given a break in debt repayments. The problem, however, is that, you can't treat debt as cavalierly as some of these countries have done. For example, in the case of Pakistan, they have always depended on it. And their USP has been that, look, because we are a nuclear power state, nobody will let us fold over. We can continue to spend till kingdom come and somebody will come to bail us out. Now, either you want to go down that road, or you say, okay, fine, we give us a break, we will reform, we will not spend the kind of spend. Tamanna, they have given 150% extra allowance to their bureaucrats and soldiers.
Yes, we've established that they're living beyond their means. But the question I'm asking, and because I'm wrapping up right now, Michael, last word from you. What makes India relatively more secure?
Performing economy on the whole, the growth patterns have just been stronger, which is quite impressive given that unemployment has been a persistent factor and it continues to be one. So I think that having those safeguards of having a bigger, stronger, better performing economy over time is important. Final point, Bangladesh is a real success story. And I think that all of these countries you've discussed, and also India, could take some lessons from what Bangladesh has been able to perform. It's been, I think, the fastest growing economy in the region in South Asia over the last 2 years based on a number of measures. So that could be an interesting angle to look at as well.
Well, absolutely. Pushing their exports in a very successful way has been part of that formula. I have to wrap up, but I want to thank all of you for joining the show today.